Welcome to Renata Leuffen Corporation. I am Renata Leuffen, and today I want to express my view on the issue of homeschooling, home education, learning without school. I originally come from Germany, from a city called Düsseldorf, and I had a son called Danny. He was born in 1984. He taught himself to count, he taught himself to swim, he taught himself how to ride a bicycle within less than half an hour. He had a very inquisitive mind, and I really encouraged him to learn naturally since he was born. We spent a lot of time out in nature, and we went to a lot of beautiful places, and he had access to wonderful children's books and everything that he needed to satisfy his hunger for learning, because he had a hunger for learning, and also to be inspired to get new ideas. I looked at the best way to help my son to develop his full potential, and I looked at the area of homeschooling, learning without a normal, in apostrophe, school. And I told the school department in Düsseldorf that I intended to continue to educate my son at home. I even went and got myself examined and got a certain certificate which teachers normally obtain. And I even set up my own homeschool called the Albert Schweitzer Homeschool. And I invited the authorities to come to my home, to have a look for themselves, to talk about it. And I presented a file with a lot of documentary evidence from the point of view of child development experts like Dr. Raymond Moore from the United States, which highlights that it is actually beneficial for a great number of children. I don't have to say for every individual child, because every family is different, every child is different, but it is generally very beneficial for children to learn outside of school, to learn at home. And if you watch TED Talks, you may remember the episode when someone talked about how schools destroy our creativity. What happened was I got into a real battle with the German authorities over the issue of whether I had a right to educate my son at home or not. What they did was they accused me of child abuse, of harming my son, because I refused to send him to school. In fact, my son and I had visited a school, and I just wanted to give him the opportunity, because obviously I didn't want to enforce my will upon his will, but I wanted him to also be involved in the final decision of where he would continue to learn, because he had always been learning at home. So we visited the school, and while we were there, some boys were spitting at each other, and then they hit each other, and my son said, "Mom, I don't want to go here." And I obviously understood. My intention was to provide my son with the best environment to learn, to be who he was, to develop himself, and to embark on a road of success, on a road of a good life, of a good future, and of true happiness. Obviously, for me, it's very important to integrate love into education, love and understanding. We educate the child according to his or her needs and interests. We don't impose a system upon our children. We don't prescribe what they should memorize and fill their minds with. Our minds are so beautiful, and our minds are also quite fragile, and our minds and our sanity must be protected. So I continued to educate my son at home. In 1992 we visited Rome, and the personal assistant of Pope John Paul II heard about our case, our struggle to do home education in Germany. He placed us in row 1 during an official audience with the Pope, in the row where normally only the queens and kings and heads of state and dignitaries sit. And the Pope blessed my son, and this was then shown, because we did a picture. They always do a picture for you when you visit the Pope's official events. And this picture was published by the newspaper Bild Düsseldorf. I went through the court system. I put in seven constitutional complaints before the German Supreme Court for my right to educate my son Danny at home. And it was clear that he was benefiting from the education that he received. It was clear he wasn't isolated, and it was clear that he was a very happy boy who easily socialized and integrated with other people. What I experienced in the justice system was that again, no one listened to me. No one looked at the arguments that I presented. And actually at that time, I could not find a solicitor to represent me, because every solicitor represented to go against the state with regards to the right to homeschool in the country of Germany. I experienced violence. I experienced defamation. I experienced persecution. And it was so bad that one evening, I remember, we were at home and I was cooking potatoes. I was just about to do a nice meal when I got a call from someone at the local newspaper, and he said, "Be careful, the authorities will come and they are planning to enter your home by violence and to take your son away from you." I turned the cooker off, put the potatoes away, took some things, told my son we have to go away, took my son and drove many miles to a different city, and we spent the night there in a hotel. I don't know if the authorities ever came. The German Supreme Court rejected my application. At this time, because it's such a long time that has passed since then, I still have to reread all my constitutional complaints, and I still have to re-establish the facts. I think they rejected at least 1 or 2 of my constitutional complaints. Then I went to the European Commission for Human Rights. It's now called the European Court for Human Rights. And the judges there debated, and they actually fought over the matter, and they actually quarreled over it and took it even to the plenum, and then they rejected my application. Now, my application for the right to homeschool my son in Germany was then brought before 2 organizations which work with the United Nations, one of them being EUDEL. And they looked at the rejection of my application by the European Commission for Human Rights, and they told me, "We cannot find a reason why they rejected your application." This is very sad, that people who are actually in the right, who actually represent ideas that are true and good, who are then being persecuted, that they cannot get justice within our justice system. And one of America's most famous lawyers put it this way: justice is just a myth. And that says a lot. After the European Commission on Human Rights rejected my application to educate my son Danny at home, we both fled for our lives, and literally fled for our lives. And our first destination was France, where we had a lot of support and where a lot of homeschooling families were happy and willing to accommodate us and to help us. And we spent time there. From one minute to the other, I took 3 bags and a suitcase and my son. I fled. We had to leave everything behind. My son lost most of his clothes, all his playing materials, books. I lost everything. Everything. My whole existence, my whole history, my whole identity, everything. Because I wanted to educate my son at home. French friends who lived near Geneva then took me to the United Nations office in Geneva. And I wanted to file an application against Germany there with them. But they told me, we cannot process your case because Germany did not sign a special treaty. So, there I was, there we were, homeless, persecuted, without a homeland, in exile. And our whole present and future had been destroyed. And not only this, also my reputation and my career as a writer and educator had been destroyed. We had everything, and from one moment to the other we had nothing. We were then told by these 2 United Nations human rights organizations in Geneva to go to England and to live in London, because fortunately England was the only country which didn't sign a document to deport children. And the German authorities, after we already lived in London in exile, actually contacted Interpol and asked for the deportation of my son. Interpol sent a policeman around, he looked at the living condition my son was in and said he is safe and well, and Interpol refused to cooperate with the German authorities. They refused to deport my son, Danny. I am, because of what I experienced, a strong advocate to establish the right of parents to educate their children at home in Germany and in every other country in the world. I have experienced injustice, and I've suffered since the injustice was imposed upon me by first the German authorities and then the European Commission on Human Rights. My son Danny died in exile at the age of 27 in 2011. He could never cope with living in exile. He experienced a severe, deep trauma, and so did I. This experience with our justice system that creates injustice, the persecution, the loss of everything, has also traumatized me for life. I don't think it is right to persecute parents who educate their children at home. I've met many parents who educate their children at home. For example, it has always been legal that Americans can educate their children at home. Germans can't in Germany, but American people, and most of them members of the American army, they have always been allowed to educate their children at home. Now, what many people don't know is that home education and education outside of schools has always been legal in Germany. In fact, the first German constitution had an article number 154 which stated that home education does not underlie any restrictions. So the first German constitution actually established the right of unrestricted learning at home. And many famous Germans like Wolfgang von Goethe and Theodor Fontane and others have been educated at home. And many people have never heard about one of Germany's greatest educators, Berthold Otto, who lived in Berlin and who promoted home education and wrote many positive things about it. And he also, as far as I remember now, wanted to educate his own child or children at home, and the authorities then didn't want him to, but he then got his way. One of the greatest injustices on this planet, and there are so many injustices, and there are too many injustices, but one of the greatest injustices is to persecute parents who want to educate their children at home. And what has been happening in Germany is terrible. And this is, you are a parent, you refuse to send your child to school, you reject compulsory and enforced school education. The authorities tell you to send your child to school, you say, I will not relent. They then take away all your parental rights, or part of your parental rights. Then officials come to your home, break in or whatever, take your child or your children and bring them to a children's home, and you have lost your children. Suddenly they are in the care of the state and being forced to attend school. And I have been in contact, and I am actually in contact with parents who had to go through this terrible persecution. And I remember one mother, 2 of her sons were put into a children's home, and one son was actually going to school and the other one was learning at home, but the authorities took both her sons and put both into children's homes. And she said that her marriage was destroyed because of this event, and that her children have been broken for life. Why do we close our eyes and ears to such barbaric and inhuman activities? Why do we allow any government in the earth to persecute parents to educate their children at home? Why do we accept this injustice? Why do we just look away? There are so many children who learn so successfully in the United States, and a number of them have gone to university and are enjoying successful careers. Whenever I meet parents in England and in other places who tell me proudly that they have or are educating their children at home, I always have to cry. I always have to think about the injustice done to me and to my son, that we lost everything and were traumatized because we did something which is legal in most of the countries of the world. I think there are only maybe 20 where home education, homeschooling isn't currently finalized as a human right. So these parents are doing something and it's legal in their country and they are free and they are happy. And I did something which is legal almost anywhere in the world and something which is being supported by child development specialists, by experts, educators, and I was persecuted and lost everything. It's almost unbearable to go through something like this. And yet I'm fortunate, my son was never put into a children's home. And this was the reason why we fled from Germany, because I never wanted my son to be put into a children's home and to be forced, spoon-fed, this compulsory education. Because I don't believe in the curriculum of our schools. And I remember I used to be the best pupil in the entire history of my grammar school. And I still remember what I learned in Latin. For example, I will always be able to recite the verb I love you, I love, yeah? Like amos, amo, amas, amat, amant, amatis, amand. I learned this, but it never helped me with anything in life. It never created any benefit for me. And I have actually rebelled in the school system, against the school system. And on one occasion I refused to do tests because of the unbearable situation in our school system, because I was very talented and gifted. I was so advanced and no one really helped me in school, and even the decision to let me jump one class was rejected, and no one ever really helped me while I was at school to find myself and to really learn what I wanted to learn. Instead, I was forced to memorize all this stuff which is useless for my life and for my happiness. I do strongly advocate homeschooling, education without formal schools. If we have homeschooling, home education, then we will also have free schools. And the existence of free schools depends very largely on the existence of the right to homeschool and to educate children at home. What I want is that Germany readopts this article number 145, that home education is not subject to any restrictions in its present constitution. This is really a must, because I was just contacted in the last few days by a mother from Germany who indicated that she went through a really horrible situation because she wanted to educate her child or her children at home. This persecution of parents must stop, and we must educate all governments around the world about the true benefits and the true meaning of home education. And we must establish the natural right to learn at home and to teach one's children at home, and the process of natural, unrestricted learning, the freedom of education, the freedom of learning. We must really make sure that this right is protected by all governments in all countries worldwide. And we live now in the space age, and things will change rapidly in the coming decades. Humanity will not survive with compulsory and enforced school education. We need a new education system, we need a new curriculum, we need the breath of freedom and free thinking in our education system. We got to look at what's not working, we got to face reality, we got to really deal with the fact that most teachers are burned out and unhappy, that most children are not really learning, they are being conformed. They are being drawn away from their natural gifts and talents in many, many cases, and from their true identities and destinies. We must commit ourselves to creating justice and freedom and love in our education system. The right of parents to educate their children at home is a natural right. It is an eternal right. And I believe that everyone who is truly educated about what home education and homeschooling really means, and that it is working well in all countries where it's being practiced. It's working well in the United Kingdom, it's working well in the US, it's working well in Australia, and so forth. I think everyone who really understands what homeschooling, home education means, will realize that it is a good cause, that it benefits children, that it can save a number of children from constant, continuous bullying at school, that it can support the gifted and talented children among us, and that it is a way of educating that represents peace. Because learning at home and educating your child at home contributes to world peace. Happy children who can develop naturally, who can really develop their gifts and talents, who enjoy learning. These are the carriers of peace and light that we need in this new age, the space age, that we have already entered. And we can formulate it even in this way, that we say that the future of humanity, the survival of humanity, depends on the establishment of the right of parents to educate their children at home, and the spirit of freedom and love in our education system. Our education system doesn't breathe love at the moment. It's a system based upon fear. And fear is not the right way for the future of humanity. I've written a book in 1992. It's actually not a book, it's a pamphlet against compulsory and enforced school education. It's called Living Naturally Without School. And it's available on Amazon. It's also available on my website, www.renataleuffen.com.